Alright guys, welcome back to another video on the Super Duper World of Sports channel. And today we're looking at the top 3 Week 3 fantasy performances from every fantasy position. This is for full PPR, and let's get into it. At the quarterback position, we have in first place Lamar Jackson of the Baltimore Ravens with 39.42 fantasy points uh, in a very good game. A good win against the Patriots, and they even injured Mac Jones. So now the Patriots are undermanned at quarterback, and the Ravens got what they wanted in the win. And Lamar Jackson, once again, getting what he wants, having his way in that game. No setbacks for him. Number 2, Jalen Hurts of the Philadelphia Eagles, on fire. The entire offense is on a roll, so to speak. 35.02 fantasy points for him. Quite expected. I mean, he is a top 5, maybe even top 3. No, undebatably, he's a top 3 fantasy quarterback. Um, there's no reason to believe otherwise. And Josh Allen of the Buffalo Bills is number 3 for quarterbacks this week. He had 26.7 in the losing effort to Miami. I mean, hey, they lost, but he still put up quite a bit of yards, quite a bit of good stats. Isaiah McKenzie was more involved this time as well. And definitely Josh Allen still culminating into that huge star. And we're still continuing to see that. Fantasy running backs. Number 1 was actually Khalil Herbert of the Chicago Bears. Took over after David Montgomery got injured early, and he took full advantage of that, putting up almost 31 fantasy points on the game. Texans got destroyed by the running game of the Bears here. Khalil Herbert ran all over them. He had, I think, 157 yards and 2 touchdowns. Thralling of the Texans. At number 2, Derrick Henry of the Tennessee Titans. And he's finally back doing what Derrick Henry should be doing, what he always has been doing, putting up 25.3 fantasy points. And this one was against the now 0-3 Raiders. Titans are back to their winning ways, made the Raiders the only winless team in the league now. And Derrick Henry's back. I have no concerns now. It should be a smooth ride from here. Number 3, Jamal Williams of the Detroit Lions took over because DeAndre Swift, their Lions are kind of trying to rest him this next few weeks. Their bye week is actually in week 7, I believe, which is 2 or 3 weeks from now, I'm pretty sure. So Jamal Williams is getting is going to be getting a lot of work in the meantime. Put up 25 fantasy points, give or take a little. Fantasy wide receivers, number 1 was actually Devontae Smith of the Philadelphia Eagles, who put up 30.9 fantasy points, went off in that against the Commanders' defense. Commanders are so vulnerable to anything now, and the Philadelphia Eagles especially exploited that to the fullest extent. And number 2, Mac Hollins is making a surprise appearance here. He had 29.96 fantasy points that came from I think he caught his own pass or something. 4 passing yards somehow. But yeah, 29.96 fantasy points. A huge showing. He had 8 catches for 158 yards and a touchdown too. And he even outperformed Devonta Adams, which is quite a feat. And at number 3, we had 28 fantasy points scored by Marquise Brown of the Arizona Cardinals. He had a whopping 14 catches on the day, had 140 yards. I mean, the average yards per catch was only 10, but with 14 catches, yeah, that'll get you almost 150 yards on the day. That's exactly what Marquise Brown was able to do. Hollywood is back. And for the fantasy tight ends, number 1 was Mark Andrews, who had 28.9 fantasy points, pretty much 29. He had 2 touchdowns 8 catches for 89 yards. Definitely a huge stat line for them. Lamar Jackson, definitely thriving in that offense. And Mark Andrews is the prime beneficiary of that success for Lamar Jackson. Number 2 is David Njoku of the Cleveland Browns. He finally broke out of the shell, put up 23 fantasy points, 23.9, pretty much 24, in their victorious effort against the Steelers on Thursday Night Football. Almost 90 yards, a touchdown as well. He should be far more involved in the offense from now on. And at number 3, Travis Kelce of the Kansas City Chiefs. Back to his elite ways. Put up almost 18 fantasy points there. Great game for the Chiefs, although they lost it in the last minutes to the Colts. 20-17 was the final score, by the way. Chiefs definitely did not show us that they can hold on to games in the end. He had 4 catches for 58 yards and 1 touchdown. Definitely a great performance from Travis Kelce as well. And for the fantasy kickers, number 1 is Greg Zuerlein of the New York Jets, who scored 16 fantasy points in the 27-12 loss against the Cincinnati Bengals. Greg Zuerlein was the only player to score points for the Jets that day. So that explains his high fantasy point total here. Number 2, again, Graham Gano shows up for the Giants, puts up 14 fantasy points. The Graham Gano has been doing very well as of late. Pretty good fantasy kicker option. And at number 3, for the Chicago Bears, it's Cairo Santos who put up 13 fantasy points. And and their 23-20 win against the Houston Texans, he made the game-winning field goal. He's the reason they won. And should carry a lot of momentum going into week number 5. And last but not least, the fantasy DST's defense special teams. The best defense special team this week was the Philadelphia Eagles, who had 18 fantasy points. They had full control over the Washington Commanders in this game, and that showed with the amount of fantasy points all the players had, defensively and offensively, a throbbing of them. Number 2 is the Cincinnati Bengals, in quite an easy matchup for the defense, putting up 16 fantasy points against the Joe Flacco-led New York Jets, who, speaking of the Jets, they should be getting Zach Wilson back this week against the Pittsburgh Steelers. Back to the Bengals, though. They only let up field goals, no touchdowns given up, explaining the 16 fantasy points there. And tied for third place, the Denver Broncos defense and the Carolina Panthers DST both put up 14 fantasy points. Denver Broncos in that 1-point win against the 49ers. Actually, I mean, they only scored 9 points offensively, and the 49ers scored 10, but the Broncos still won. Because Jimmy Garoppolo doesn't have a sense of direction. And the Carolina Panthers did beat the Saints. Definitely a huge defensive showing from them. They would have won by a lot more if Baker Mayfield was actually half decent and could get the ball to DJ Moore offensively. But defensively, Carolina Panthers had no remorse for the New Orleans Saints this week. Although they did let up huge production for Chris Olave. He had a huge monster week in the absence of Landry and Thomas. And that is it for week number 4, top fantasy performances. Thank you guys so much for watching this video, and I will see you in the next top fantasy performances video.